Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Neighborhood Democracy author webinar. My name is Patty Webb, and I am the Marketing Manager for Stylus Publishing. Stylus webinars bring you direct access to our authors and their latest titles. Today, I'm happy to introduce Richard Garashi, author of Neighborhood Democracy, Building Anchor Partnerships Between Colleges and Their Communities. The book is due out from Stylus in December and is co-published with AAC&U. Richard Garashi is the longest serving president of Wagner College, becoming president emeritus on his retirement in 2019. He has served both as a member of the board of directors and board chair of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, Campus Compact, the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities, the New American Colleges and Universities, New York State Higher Education Services Corporation, and Project Pericles. He has also served on the National Task Force on Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement and the Anchor Institution Task Force. Joining Richard is Tim Gannon and Pedro Santiago. Tim Gannon is a retired high school teacher, assistant principal, and principal with over 40 years of experience in high schools across New York City. In his time as principal, Tim was a transformational leader in the Port Richmond partnership with Wagner College. His school, Port Richmond High School, is one of the most successful community schools in New York City as the Department of Education moved to this model in 2013. The Wagner College Port Richmond Partnership Leadership Academy provided more than 50 students with access to college success. These students' university graduation rate is 100%. Pedro Santiago is an alumnus of the Wagner Port Richmond Partnership and is currently earning his master's at University of Connecticut. So today, please welcome Richard, Tim, and Pedro.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Tim and Pedro, for being on, and thank you for the participants out in the cyberspace who are thoughtful enough to want to listen to this presentation about neighborhood democracy, building anchor partnerships between colleges and their communities. Let me do a preview of the book overall, and then I'm going to turn to Tim. We specifically zone in on one example of anchor partnership, which is the one that he and I participated in as principal agents, the Wagner College Port Richmond partnership on Staten Island, and we'll tell you more about the community. And of course, with Pedro Santiago, who came to us as a high school student in the Port Richmond Leadership Academy program. Before that, in a wonderful prep school, New World Prep, which was started in part from the partnership. And then through Wagner successfully as a student and a leader, and now as a graduate student at the University of Connecticut in educational and student services and counseling. So this is a book precisely about the renewal and revitalization of the civic mission of higher education, of colleges and universities, in the face of dramatically increased social inequality and economic inequality in our country, the persistence of institutional racism in our society, which has led to rather dramatic outcomes in K through 16 outcomes. And of course, the moment we live in now is the peril of our own democracy, which is threatened in so many different ways from those who would replace it with something that other than is truly democratic and principled. So let me just take you through the book. It starts with kind of setting the stage for what I call the civic imperative for higher education, the dramatic challenge to democracy, with first starting with what we've seen historically through the United States from its history as a republic, which Richard Hofstadter, a wonderful late historian, had characterized in his first article and later book on the paranoid style of American politics, where we've always had groups that were anti-democratic, anti-immigrant, racist, nativist, anti-intellectual, always had a strain of that in American history, all the way through. It ebbs and flows with different crises, all the way through to the present period. And Hofstadter's article and later book chronicled that. Well, we saw a resurgence of that, obviously, on January 6th, 2021, with the attack and insurrection on the Capitol. But for years, we've seen a declining public opinion in the belief in American government and its institutions. We've seen a severe swelling of social and political polarization, beautifully, I think, cataloged by Ezra Klein's book, Why Are We So Polarized? We see that stalemated government, which has persisted for over 25 years, where both parties have become captive of ideological differences, where before those parties had liberals and conservatives in each party, and there was a lot of cross-party coalitions that it was able to get legislation through. But now in a winner-take-all system, you can see the inability of legislation to get through and the frustration of the American public with belief in democratic agencies. And of course, we saw before January 6th, we saw that horrible riot in Charlottesville, Virginia. And who would have thought in our lifetime that we would have ever seen people, men, mostly men, marching with torches at night, yelling Jews out and yelling, you will not replace us. So the severity of social climate, it really is a threat, dramatic threat to our democratic culture and democratic government. So the book sort of starts there and then talks about the increased wealth gap in the United States. So the statistics are pretty direct. If you look at wealth and distribution of wealth, not just income, we're about as divided by wealth and acute inequality in 2021 as we were in 1914 with the advent of the federal income tax. So think about that. We've had 100 years of federal taxation, which was aimed at redistributing wealth and income in a way that would give up more opportunity and a sense of liberty and equality to American citizens. And yet after 100 plus years of that, we've actually at the same sort of place. That has dramatic implications for everything from the way we live and how we live and where we live. We've seen a spike in residential segregation, particularly in cities and metropolitan areas. We see neighborhoods which are Black and brown neighborhoods, which are segregated from white neighborhoods. Most all of our institutions reflect that. The implication of all of that is particularly in what I call shadow neighborhoods, neighborhoods of Black and brown folks who live outside of the mainstream of political opportunity and economic mainstream of American life. Their opportunities are extremely limited. It's not to say that hard work and perseverance can help you climb over for a few, but we're now living in a moment where the segregation is rather dramatic. We're more segregated in New York City, for instance, in our school systems than we were in 1954 with the Supreme Court decision to essentially end Jim Crow and separate but equal education. That's kind of a dramatic statement. It's due to residential segregation, but it also has implications, political implications for the way in which we distribute resources and opportunity. So one kind of illustration of all of that as we set the book up is to look at something like the way in which reading becomes destiny in the school systems in the present time. We don't like to think about the fact that we live in a society where predetermined outcomes can really be the reality. We like to think of that we live in a meritorious society. And when we like to cling to that notion that through hard work and perseverance, we can get where we have to go as individuals. But when you look at the macro systems of where we are, you find out that that's not quite the case. So for instance, if you look at an African-American boys in the United States, if they're not on the fourth grade reading level by the end of the fourth grade, their chances of being incarcerated any time in their life is 80% greater than if they were on the fourth grade reading level at the end of the fourth grade. Think about that. And the same can be said for math later on as getting into the algebra track for high school, to be on a college track. So we live in a world now with segregated education, what I call educational apartheid, where the opportunities that flow to get to college are limited. And of course, college itself, as we know, a four-year college degree on average carries about an $800,000 to $1 million lifetime bonus in earnings, just at the base level. So without having access to that, you're already behind the eight ball in terms of climbing into the middle class from these neighborhoods. And then we know that educational gaps and reading gaps correlate strongly with incarceration overall. Something between 50 and 70% of those incarcerated in the American criminal justice system, depending on what analysis you use, 50 to 70% of the inmates are functionally illiterate. Let's think about that in terms of educational preparation and where it takes you. You don't finish high school, your opportunities for having a decent life are very, very limited, and likely bad things happen to you as an individual. And also, according to the mayor-elect of New York City the other day, we have a prison in New York City, which is notorious, called Rikers. And he has asserted, and I think he's right about this, that the inmates at Rikers jail 55% of them are learning disabled. So when you think about reading and educational opportunities, residential segregation, and educational apartheid, you begin to see the stream between opportunity, birth opportunity, location, and then levels of incarceration. That's difficult for democracy to live with that kind of level of inequality and sustain itself. Never mind the functional attack on democracy. So if there ever has been a time when the civic mission of higher education, of college universities was needed, it's now. These shadow neighborhoods, as I call them, are desperate for additional allies, new allies, to work with them and partner with them to begin to reverse some of these trends. And the model that we've hit upon with many, many other institutions that we're highlighting in this book called anchor partnerships are essentially the following. These neighborhoods, these shadow neighborhoods, need allies, and universities themselves are in deep trouble, fiscally and every other way, and they need new allies as well. And so there's kind of a symbiotic relationship between universities and colleges in these neighborhoods that's there for the taking. Anchor partnerships is one way in which that happens, and we'll talk a lot about that in this session. But universities themselves find themselves in a fiscal crisis. 90+% of universities and colleges live off of enrollment and tuition revenue. That's the heart and soul of their business plans. Yet what we call net tuition revenue, that is the tuition revenue after the institutional scholarships, their own money is given out back to students. Net tuition revenue has been flat for almost 20+ years in the United States. We tend to think of wealthier and wealthier colleges because we look at the top 50 to 100 of endowments and top football programs and the like, but that's the gloss over what is a more desperate situation. So colleges are struggling with revenue, net revenue. They're trying to manage expenses within that envelope of limitation. They have, in competition with one another, private schools have become to discount the tuition, that is, give back more of the tuition dollars as scholarships to students to help them get in and afford school. That reduces the amount of revenue, net revenue they have for all the elements that go into making for a successful college experience for students. And at the same time, public institutions, who also begun to discount a bit, are suffering from a decline over a long period of time in state appropriations for higher education. So they have less resources to draw as well. So at the very time when we think colleges and universities need to renew their civic mission, they themselves are in a stew. College students are finding it difficult to afford college. Student debt is rising. At the same time, as institutions are looking for more students and more enrollment. One important factor which links these pieces together is that the overall population of the United States is, as you know, stagnating quite a bit. The latest census demonstrates that. But the one part of the population that's increasing significantly are Black and brown communities. So the places where, in fact, colleges and universities should be linking and thinking about cultivating and preparing students for college are in the very neighborhoods where there's very low college attendance. Hence the notion of this book. And so that sort of sets the stage for where we are. The need for a civic renewal to bolster democracy, the need for addressing inequality, and the need for these shadow neighborhoods to find allies and partners, democratically small d, with universities and colleges. They both have a self-interest in allying together in powerful ways. So that's what the book is about. It's about this notion of partnership. Let's move to one example. And there are many examples in the book. The book, I should tell you, starts off with the peril of democracy and looks at the level of inequality. It looks at the historic and current practices around civic engagement of universities from the very beginnings with Jefferson and Franklin, understanding that higher education is about preparing not only students to be full of knowledge, but also, and how to evaluate knowledge, but also that become educated and engaged and knowledgeable citizens, that a democracy couldn't exist without that. All the way to the advent in the late 80s and early 90s of something called service learning, community-based learning courses. And the book looks at the promise and limits of those courses as well, having been a practitioner of them myself. We go on to look at the case for anchor partnerships and sustainability of those partnerships financially in every which way. And then we look at examples and models from University of Pennsylvania in its alliance with West Philadelphia, to Rutgers Newark, which has a remarkable model, of ally with the city. Rutgers Camden, also a powerful model. Augsburg University in Minneapolis, aligning with the Somali community and others, and a corridor in downtown Minneapolis. We could look at Nebraska, University of Nebraska, Omaha, which has had a very strong anchor commitment to that community. De Anza College, one of the largest community colleges in the country, and Silicon Valley, the lower basin of the Silicon Valley in California, and so on and so forth. There are many, many, many others, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore and the like. Many. We go through some of that in the book, and then we look specifically at this one case that the three of us are most familiar with, which is the case of Wagner College and Port Richmond on Staten Island. So let me just set the stage for Port Richmond, and then I'm going to throw it to Tim, and we can open up a conversation about some of the details of these partnerships, looking at this one case. And Pedro will chime in with his experience both as a student, a leader throughout both high school and college program, and now as a graduate student. So Port Richmond on Staten Island. Staten Island itself is one of the 5 boroughs of New York. It is close to 500,000 in population, which makes it larger than St. Louis, Oakland, California, and many other cities, Cleveland and the like, but dwarfed by the other 4 boroughs of the other 8.5 million people in New York. On Staten Island, which is divided north and south shores, the North Shore facing back to Brooklyn and Manhattan, the South Shore facing to New Jersey, there's racial segregation broadly in those 2 areas of the island, the north being much more diverse than the south part of the island. And on the North Shore is a community called Port Richmond, a historic community, one of the bellwethers of the founding of Staten Island and of New York as we know it. And that community presently is about 15,000 people, according to the census. And it, depending on how you count and who counts, around 50% of those residents, close to that, are undocumented Mexicans, not Mexican Americans, but undocumented Mexicans, mostly from Oaxaca, Mexico. The rest of the population are made up of African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and white working class residents of New York. It's a poor community in many ways. It's a working class and poor community. And the high school there had historic problems with racial conflict inside the school and the like. Around 2009, 2010, when I was president of Wagner College, I hit upon the fact that so much of higher education had put so much work into community service and civic engagement through either the curriculum where courses were taught in communities and with communities, or just straight out direct service of community service. But with all that effort, all that labor, we weren't changing the coefficients of inequality in these poor communities, in these what I call shadow communities, in any way, shape, or form. We were changing individual lives, but not changing, and both of our current students, college students who are learning about poverty and inequality and how to engage it, if you will, in the best of those courses. And of course, those communities themselves were there entertaining folks who were working and volunteering in their communities, but really nothing was really changing in terms of opportunity and economic advancement. So as president of Wagner, with wonderful staff that I had, we identified 5 or 6 communities that maybe we would put 60 or 70% of our civic mission into one neighborhood strategically to see if we could really partner across aligning a lot of our assets with that institution, our social assets. So we chose Port Richmond because of the demographics of the community. We thought enough infrastructure there to work with. And while we were still in these other communities, the partnership itself, a very defined strategic relationship with one community, was what we signed on for in 2009, 2010. So the goal was, and I'll tell this to Tim in a second here, the goal was essentially just to look at the assets of Wagner College. So we have 2,000 students. We have a large nursing school, which does a tremendous amount of clinical hours. Why not put a significant amount of those hours in Port Richmond to take and help assist that community, assist one of our other local partners, Richmond University Medical Center, which is the local hospital and has an overrun emergency room. We have a PA program, a physician assistance program, which had wonderful students who were going into that profession who could do interesting research and direct service as well. With a pre-med program, which had wonderful students who wanted to be doctors and neighborhoods like this. We have a business school, which students are learning finance and accounting. Why couldn't it help small businesses learn how to do bank loans and business plans and so on and so forth? Help them understand what they had to gather to do taxes and the like. So while learning, they could be doing. We have wonderful program in the arts and theater and film and performance. Why couldn't they be working with community partners there to give the community a voice, a visual, performative voice and sense of self-esteem about their own legacies and heritage? And of course, we were all committed through the social sciences and other programs to immigration justice. That would be a very important part of our work. So I started to reach out to community potential partners to find out who there we could align with and find out if the assets and intentions of the college match the needs and desires of the community there. And one of the first people I met was Tim Gannon, who was the principal of Port Richmond High School. Relatively new principal, I think, at the time, a couple of years into it. I'll just set the stage in this way. I'd been in a lot of inner city schools. My wife, Karen, had worked in inner city schools. And you usually walk into an inner city school and there's a bit of chaos going on. There's lots of disruption potentially going on with behavior. Usually the place is under-resourced. The place looks a mess. I walked into Port Richmond High School, was received by the security people. I looked around, the place was immaculate. And that was my first surprise. My second surprise was every single wall I could find had a poster on it celebrating some student and organization for their achievement and their commitment to excellence. That there was an incredible amount of cheerleading going on. So I knew before I ever met Tim that we were in for a good relationship because he understood what he was doing in terms of being a source of a positive source for advancement in this community. So Tim, why don't you take it from there? And we could talk more about the dynamics of the partnership, how it was organized, what we achieved together, and the like. And then we'll do a little Q&A, and then Pedro will come in with his story as well. And then we'll fill the rest of it out in terms of the whole anchor model.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're at. So Richard has done a very good job of kind of setting the stage about Port Richmond and Staten Island. He failed to mention that Kim Kardashian is now dating Pete Davidson on Staten Island. So our population has increased even more. But to kind of piggyback off what he just said, I can assure you those two will not be anywhere near the Port Richmond section of Staten Island. Port Richmond High School was that high school that often appear in large communities like like Staten Island, rather. The high school that people don't really want to go to, that are worried about the community. And yet what I found over my years there was all of the visitors, like Richard, would fall in love with the kids. If folks came in from the central office because we were doing a special math initiative with the University of Texas, they would come, they would observe, and always at the end of the day, they would come in and talk about the fact that my kids held the door for them. And that's not typical. Or the kids said good morning in a class, even though they were strangers to them. So I found that we had this spirit, but we had horrible self-esteem. Many of my kids were down at the 2nd or 3rd grade reading level. And even my own self-esteem after maybe 2 years was getting hit because all I was being hit from supervisors and central was about my graduation rate, the reading scores, the math scores, and I would make arguments about if they're coming in with a 2nd grade reading level, you can't expect too much. But you know, in the world of politics in New York City, that didn't matter. So the first thing when we talk about an anchor institution, the impact it had on us as a community school and myself as a leader was that Richard gave me my self-esteem, and he helped to establish us to believe in ourselves. And Wagner College and Richard could have chosen any high school on Staten Island. In fact, people said, why you? Why your school? Because they knew better students in other schools, they could go to Wagner College. My kids were not going to go to Wagner College. But Richard and Wagner brought us an energy. And because of the common vision that Richard and I had, I believe we were able to bring that to the school and begin to empower kids to believe in themselves. And honestly, even though my staff was great, I think it also empowered our teachers to believe more in our kids. It's like when you're raising a child, you kind of forget about the good stuff that they do, and you're just focused on the day-to-day insanity. We started to feel, because of the relationship, a lot better. And Richard and I started small. I can remember in the beginning, all I wanted was a Wagner College classroom in the summer, because my kids never would go to college. I had my PTA vice president at a PTA meeting argue with me that college wasn't worth it. And that's when I realized I can't just get to the kids. I also have to get to the parents in the fight about going to college and seeing the possibility of college beyond high school. So we started with putting my kids on the college campus for some of their summer school experience. I paid for the teacher. It was just, let's get them off of our campus, let them experience college. And what it's like to be independent and go to lunch on your own and then come back for a second class at the end of the day. And then Richard began to need an office for college kids in the community. Wagner College was coming down, the students were doing good work and then going back up to the campus, but sometimes they had time to kill. And our strategy became, well, if selfishly, I wanted the Wagner College kids in my building so that there were college kids walking around interacting with my high school kids. And we created an office in the building so that Wagner College kids could use a phone, use computers, have a place to hang out on a cold day before they went back out to some of the various civic engagement opportunities that they had in the community. And over time, Richard and I, and we make fun of this, we would have 4 or 5 lousy breakfasts at a diner every year. And there was no agenda going in. We literally visioned through breakfast. And I'd be like, I'm thinking about this. Can you give me this? And he'd say, like, yeah, let's do this, but then let's go one step further and go here. And out of that, we both had a to-do list after an hour of coffee and lousy eggs. And then we would go back, bring it to our staffs, and kind of bring it to life. And over the years, when Richard and I would speak at various conferences around the country, one of the things that people would say is, well, why does it work with you and Richard? And I never thought about it until one day when we were in Louisville. And it hit me that Richard and I always say yes. And that became like the catchphrase at Port Richmond High School. I'd say, we say yes. No matter what happens, no matter what people ask, we say yes. And I think that optimism that he brought, helping us with our self-esteem, the fact that we could ask if I wanted tickets to a football game, if I wanted to bring kids up, if I wanted to bring my freshmen to visit a college campus, which apparently is impossible in the world. You can't get any colleges who will take freshmen. They'll take my best juniors, but taking a class of 400 freshmen to check out a campus is not something colleges are enthusiastic about. Richard suddenly is saying yes. And from that came all sorts of possibility. An education class from Wagner College actually being taught in a high school, which in my case, my belief makes sense, go right to the source and teach the class and then allow those college students to go right directly into high school classes and see what they just learned about in action. Things like that became empowering to us. And one of the most powerful things that came about was the partnerships that Richard and I didn't even know about. that his faculty and my faculty started to do things together. And I didn't know about it. Richard didn't know about it, but they developed partnerships like his nursing students working with my culinary students. We have a strong culinary program. And they put together recipes that were healthy and fun. The thing that I didn't see, and this is why I'm passionate about how this can impact our kids, meaning my high school kids, was while the nursing students were the experts in medicine and nutrition, my kids realized, hey, I'm the expert when it comes to the food preparation here. I'm the expert in the kitchen. And their self-esteem, they would joke with me and say, you know, Mr. Gannon, we taught some Wagner College kids how to cook today. And it struck me as, okay, this is way more powerful than I thought it was going to be, because my kids are taking some pride. And the whole idea was to get my kids feeling like I'm working with a Wagner College kid who's actually kind of similar to me. And if he can be in college, I can be in college.
So let me jump in here for a little bit to give a little structure about what we did. So we set up the Port Rich Partnership. We had 5 areas of influence. One was educational opportunity. We built the Port Richmond Leadership Academy through some grants and support that we had externally, which allowed high school students at Port Richmond in their sophomore year, junior, and senior year to take college courses from regular college faculty in the summer and live on campus for a part of that summer to demystify the entire experience. Our goal was to get as many of them to college as we could. We had moderate expectations there, and we focused for the most part on 75 to 80 students in terms of their average. We didn't want the cream of the crop because we felt those students were on a college track and going there. We weren't just looking to cream off the best students to go to Wagner or some other college. We were looking to make a difference in transforming the whole school and the educational opportunity. Tim shortly thereafter identified Nick Mealy, who was the principal of IS 51, the middle school that fed into the high school. And quickly, Nick Mealy identified Anthony Cosentino as the principal of Public School 21, which was the feeder for the middle school. So suddenly we had offices in all 3 schools, built an educational pipeline. Although we started backwards, we started with the high school, moved to the middle school, and then to the elementary school. At the same time, we had similar kinds of relationships in healthcare in the community with the nursing program, the PA program, the nonprofits in healthcare in that community, and there are many of them, and the hospital itself, Richmond University Medical Center, which is the local hospital, used to be St. Vincent's Hospital. And so the idea was aligning assets and creating a greater sense of knowledge about health issues and wellness, as well as direct service. And the same thing in the business school with opportunities for small business development, as I said, in the arts, and the revitalization of our particularly Spanish language program, where I had majors and students who were studying Spanish or had taken it in high school and were taking a course here or there. Suddenly the Spanish faculty and students had a real purpose in terms of being able to translate, communicate, educate students to be bilingual across the 2 institutions. So we built this educational pipeline. We had something like 60 students in our time that went through the Purple program. 59 of them went to college successfully, one of which is Pedro Santiago, who has a remarkable story, and it's chronicled in the book, as is Tim's story chronicled in the book at greater length. So Pedro, why don't you chime in here and tell us about your growing up in the Bronx and all the way getting to Staten Island, and then by the accident of things getting into Port Richmond High School, and then meeting Tim Gannon and the Purple program. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garashi and Mr. Gannon, for having me here today. So yeah, like Dr. Garashi said, I started off, my mom was a single mother. We kind of moved around, really didn't have no guidance, didn't really have much family for support. Then we finally moved to Staten Island. During my time in Staten Island, kind of back and forth between different neighborhoods within Staten Island. Being originally like located in Staten Island in the South Shore, I was displaced. I was probably the only person of color within the school I went to. And then we finally moved to a different community in Port Richmond. And then I started at New World Prep. So New World Prep, I started to learn how important student voices were in making changes within the community, just on a micro level though, of course. I had Amanda Cortez, which was my student government director at New World Prep, Joanna Beck, and they kind of just showed me there's issues within our systems, but we and you and your voices can make changes within these spaces. Then I went to Richmond High School, and of course, I wanted to follow student government. I really loved my voice because I felt like for a long time, my voice has not been utilized, and I didn't really know the impact and the power that my voice had. So at Richmond High School, I started in student government. I was with Mr. Gannon, really close. Sophomore year, I started to really fall off the bandwagon, started to just not really be confident, started to just like do teenage things, and I started to lose my guidance. I really didn't have much guidance. I didn't really know how to navigate these spaces. Also, I didn't really know what was next. What could I do after this space? Was college actually something that I could obtain? And what was all this energy I was putting into this space really gonna I don't know, depict in the long term? Finally, Mr. Gannon told me, we have the Purple Partnership, the Portsmouth Partnership, Leadership Academy, and I applied. And I told Mr. Gannon I did not want to apply. I was like, why would I waste my summers spending it in class when I could be having a good old time? But I'm so glad I did. I've met great students, great people I call my friends, I call my family, that I've had over the past 8 years, pretty much, from Purple and through this partnership, learning that although we have different identities, we share many similar experiences. And while many of us being students of marginalized identities, we kind of feel alone in spaces, but through conversations that Purple allowed us to engage in around race, identity, ethnicity, intersectionality, we were able to see that there is so much more to us than what meets the eye, so much more to us than what society has already told us that we were. And I think that was something that really got to me. How could I be anything great in this world? Who did I have as an example to be great, that looked like me, that shared my life experiences? Purple showed me that there were many people like me. Of course, while the support for people like of marginalized identities isn't where it should be, because, as we were saying, as marginalized identities continue in higher educational spaces, there's less and less diversity amongst identities within these spaces. I'm sorry, I get a little scatterbrained. I get a little nervous if I'm all over the place, but yeah. So Purple.
Talk a bit about your, first we had this wonderful moment where, so many of the Purple students would be eligible to apply for a 4-year scholarship at Wagner. Not all the students are going to Wagner. In fact, the majority weren't. We had a handful of scholarships, which through some funding and the like that we could give out. And you were one of the folks who applied for that. And can you tell that story with your mom and your mom's situation at the time as well?
Yeah. So I applied for Purple, got in, and of course we knew that there was opportunities to obtain a full ride scholarship to Wagner College. I really didn't see that possibly being an option. That there's way more students, way more that were smarter than me, more academically inclined, that has, just that I could see fitting this part way better than me. But, with Purple, I started to really become engaged, and my community started to see the issues that were prevalent in our communities, and which resulted in the ways in which I was thinking, which resulted in how many other students related and thought about themselves in higher educational spaces. So when I got the scholarship for Purple, it was my senior year, of course. And I remember I was so nervous. We were supposed to find out about scholarships kind of like 2 weeks before it didn't happen. So we're all on edge, kind of like waiting at the end of our seats. Finally got the day that, we would have these discussions, who would get the scholarship. So finally, after 5 people went in, like 2 people got the scholarship. I'm like, it is what it is, there's always other options. But yeah, I went in that day and I got the scholarship, and I started to feel that my experiences and my identities mattered and were visible within spaces, and that the work I was doing was meaningful. If that answered your question.
Yeah. And then when you came to Wagner, you joined the Bonner Leaders group, and explain that, what that was like. And then you became sort of the counselor back to the high school kids that you had come from, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So going into Wagner College, I became a Bonner leader, which focused on civic engagement. We had a strict and like a very close partnership with the Richmond partnership. I worked at Napella my freshman year as kind of like a advisor, an academic advisor for Liberian refugees, helping them with technology support, stuff like that. I did the K through 12 pipeline school tours on campus, which, like Tim said, who would really accept 100 to 400 freshmen high schoolers, yet alone we would have kindergartners, we would have middle schoolers coming into our spaces, showing them and planting the seed that you can also get here. So that was also an opportunity I had through the Bonner program. And then I decided I wanted to do more for the program that I was a part of. I thought that there was so much more we could do within those spaces. So I started off as a mentor for Purpla, working with students, supporting them through advisement, through one-on-ones. How are you doing? Also, while I started to advise students, I started to see the different layers of support that students were given within the high school structure. I started to see how honors and gateway students were given more supports in ways. And I started to find that that was my mission, to help my students obtain the supports that the high school had to offer that weren't really displayed at large within the school. Yeah, so then I moved up there, started to really express my ideas, started to, put an emphasis on our students and their voices within our programs. What are their needs? What do they want to do? And how can we make this possible? We started to focus on also financial literacy and financial aid in the beginning. And usually we focus primarily on our Purpla students, but we ended up having, through the mentors, making our Purpla student lead workshops for the rest of the high school, and engaging them in leadership opportunities.
And you learned a bit about the theory and practice of American democracy through these programs, in terms of the civics background as well, that prepared, I think, students in Bonner particularly, but also in Purpla. The classes were remarkable. We were visited by the mayor's office several times, the deputy mayor's office, and they really found that this model of the K through 16 pipeline was a powerful one, with universities serving as an ally. And on the university side, we gained so much. Not only did we gain these wonderful students, but we gained a level of understanding of Wagner students who came from all kinds of backgrounds themselves, of what it meant to be an engaged citizen, and also what it meant to be an ally in a neighborhood like this, and how much they could learn about different cultures and different norms and ethics and histories and legacies from their own, and grow and expand as a liberal education should offer you. So we learned so much, and it helped change the institution in many ways as well, the college institution. So sort of to round this out a little bit, what we found was that, what we knew in the beginning, but we became very visual to us early on in this process, was that there's so much talent amongst these youngsters in these communities, so much talent you see in the elementary school and the middle school, that if you don't change things, that whole progression that I laid out in the beginning of this discussion will overwhelm them, many of them, not all of them, but overwhelm many of them. Domestic violence, violence in the community, a lack of resources, unemployment, interpersonal issues, gang violence, all kinds of things surrounding them that begin to create real barriers to break through. And that with allies like Pedro being there in the community, and Tim at the high school, and our nurses and PAs and all the rest of it, being around and involved and engaged, they were learning and growing themselves, becoming civic professionals in their own right, their chosen professions, but also that we were developing a real alliance in the sense of building. All of them were learning what I call in the book the arts of democracy, right? They were learning about how to think for themselves critically and evaluatively. They were learning how to develop their own sense of voice, as Pedro was saying. They were learning how to understand the difference between an argument and an opinion, that an argument was based on reason and evidence. They learned about the scientific method and appreciated thinking in that way. But they also learned how to listen hard for others and their experiences. They learned how to mediate differences amongst themselves, how to essentially build collaborative opportunities for each other, coalitions, and then ultimately to take responsible action in different ways. Those are the arts of democracy. So while the students in the K through 16 pipeline were learning that, K through 12 in particular, but my college students as well, so were the leaders at the hospital, in the nonprofit organizations, in the schools, from teachers and staff members and principals and college presidents and deans and staff people in civic engagement, and many faculty engaged in this work and many students, as I said. So the sum of all of that was that we found that the anchor partnership model in this community worked well. And our goal was to help this community get greater control of its own destiny. This was not doing for the community, but doing with the community. And hence the notion of neighborhood democracy, that the notion that we were building civic leadership and capacity both in the community and on the campus. And that was really a powerful model. We could look at Rutgers Newark, we could look at Rutgers Camden, we could look at Penn, we could look at Augsburg, we could look at Hopkins, we could look at so many other institutions that I'm leaving out, some number of which are mentioned in the book, which are doing similar kinds of pieces of anchor partnerships with higher ed as the partner. There are many other partnerships as well that span other sectors in economic development and health and the like, but we're focused on higher education and its civic mission. So with that, I think maybe we want to go to some questions and answers, and I'm going to turn it back to Patty and see if we have some audience participation and questions. There's lots of questions about the fiscal viability of this, the barriers that we see in leadership changes and succession, and endless other kinds of barriers and challenges, as well as many, many benefits that we can enumerate. So with that, I throw it back to Patty, and you can maybe involve the audience in the conversation.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, we have one question in our Q&A. If anyone would like to post a question, you can either do that in the chat or using the Q&A function. Our first question is from Heather Novak. Congratulations on the book, Richard. You have been an advocate and leader regarding these issues for years, but the pandemic demands that we imagine solutions differently than we have in the past. You talked about some of the obstacles we face, but how has the pandemic changed your ideas about this work regarding silver linings? Do Tim or Pedro have thoughts from a student or partner perspective? For example, for a long time at Pace, there were students who felt that direct community work was putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, and others who saw policy changes as taking too long for those in need now. Although we are still addressing access and equity for all who do this work, we are seeing more people who understand the value of both of these approaches.
Well, I think the pandemic has had a very depressing impact on a lot of this work because so much is in the field, and most of us were cloistered, and left with these kinds of conversations on Zoom or others, and that's a hard. This work is based on relationships, on interpersonal relationships, and trust, and learning from one another, and growing together as partners, be the institutional partnerships as well as the individual relationships. And so I know the pandemic, but now we're, at least in some parts of the world, coming out of it to the degree that we can be more involved in each other's lives directly. So I don't know if we'll return to full blast in terms of the way we were so quickly, but clearly that's the goal, is to stay in the field, in the community, and on the campus, and open both to each other. But maybe Tim wants to say a word about pandemic impact on the work, and then maybe Pedro as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I guess I'm actually working on an initiative in Port Richmond to bring all of the service providers back to the table and get the partnership going again. So in terms of the kids, the K to 12 kids in New York City, it's probably around the country, but certainly in New York City, there's a lot of challenges that even us in education, we didn't see the extent of the emotional stress and the impact on the kids with schooling. So the need is there, but we've never felt that we're going into a community to help them in the moment. This was about, and Pedro's a great example, this was about building leadership so that the empowerment of the community and the leadership came from within. So it's not about us going and bringing food and doing a food drive. It's about us creating leaders who will create the food pantry and create jobs that we won't need a food pantry later on. So I don't have the solution to the pandemic. I can just tell you, in my personal opinion, the need is more now than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of trauma.
Yeah, I would say one of the quotes we would say as Bonners was working with, not for the community. And that was something that was very impactful. I think working with the communities plants to see that there is greater change, that their voices are important, and that coming together collectively, hopefully eventually, change can happen within the communities. But if not, we are building leaders. We are showing students that there are more opportunities out there. We are showing communities that within these individual siloed communities that you are able to kind of conduct the changes to an extent in which you want to see. And that might not be on a greater policy level. That might be internally through partnerships. Yeah, I had something else to say, but I lost it. I'm sorry about that.
Patty, question 2.
Question 2. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, Pedro, Tim, and Richard, for your wonderful contributions today. I can't wait to read the book. My question is for everyone. At this moment and critical time in our work and communities, what are the most critical competencies and skills that community engagement leaders need to have to move forward partnerships and initiatives like yours?
Wow. Well, first of all, the very arts of democracy that I was talking about that we were trying to get students to engage with, we as leaders, we as staff members in civic engagement world need to practice those as well. I mean, that's really, really critical, about listening, about creating a sense of empathy and reciprocity. Ralph Ellison in Invisible Man, one of the great novels of the American canon, in that wonderful book, the narrator says, without visibility, in essence, he says, I'll paraphrase, without visibility, there's no agreement, and we need agreement in order to be able to be connected to one another. So listening is what's, I think, at the forefront of it. But we need leadership, and leadership isn't only located at the president's level or at the chancellor's level. That's imperative. That makes life a lot easier. But I can tell you there are many, many examples, including in my own life, where you start at the very bottom as a lecturer or visiting professor or a professor or a staff member, and you begin to become a leader in a different sort of way, or a student leader, or a community leader, so that we practice that leadership in powerful ways. We should not be overwhelmed by the fact that we don't hold a certain amount of resources in our hand. But I think the challenge, of course, right now on the macro level is for philanthropy to step forward and identify particularly K through 16 pipelines and these kinds of anchor partnerships, never mind all the other pieces of the partnership in healthcare and housing and immigration justice, the arts, which are all critical because they form a support group for the larger work, that these partnerships are absolutely imperative if we're going to change things in terms of inequality. And I know there's good philanthropy out there. The point is more of it has to be available. And of course, we have to be accountable for how we do our work and what impact we have and how we can measure it. But I think that's part of the answer there, I would say. And hopefully we can inspire each other and stay together.
I would just add that I think people need to be risk takers. This is, you can't go by the rule, at least as a partner. I can say this now, I'm retired. They can't touch my pension. I took a lot of risk and I broke a few rules in this partnership, primarily being we purposely didn't tell any of our bosses that we were doing this until it was well established. So I think what I spoke about before about the karma between Richard and I become important. If a university is looking for a partnership, there needs to be a true sense of mission between some of the leads, and if it's forced, or if they don't feel the same passion, they should go to a different school or a different partner.
The other thing I'd just say, just to add in before, there are two other challenges. One, of course, is fiscal. And in the book, good part of one chapter is based on showing universities how it's affordable to do this work by drawing on all kinds of resources. And two, leadership changes, not just leadership changes at the institution of higher ed, but leadership changes in the schools, leadership changes in the other partners in the hospital, and in the nonprofit sector, or in the philanthropies, or in the donor base, or in the boards of trustees and regents. All of that has to be negotiated in order to sustain this work by making it a core value of where we're going. And so those are some of the challenges that have to be negotiated as well.
We have 4 more minutes, but we have 5 more questions. So if we're okay with panelists,
we'll be fast. We'll be fast.
we can go over 1 o'clock if you need to as well. So just let me know. All right, next question. My question is for Tim. Sounds like your approach has been whole school. To what extent and in what ways do you involve people throughout your school, administrators, teachers, staff, parents, students, to move work forward and really embed it in how you do school? Specifically, what training competencies and activities did you find were most impactful? This question was from Sarah Murky, who does Anchor Ed and Anchor Schools Project.
If this was a debate, I'd be like, oh, thank you for the question. Instead, I want to point out Richard wrote the book, not me. But I guess it's a great question because it really was key. What we did was, as we started this, we kept on doing what I called guaranteed successes. We made sure things were going to work on a small level before we brought them out to a larger level. So I involved one assistant principal. I had at that time I had 10 assistant principals. So I involved one assistant principal, and like any family, the other 9 got jealous and angry that the one assistant principal was involved, which then brought up the little bit of competition that they all wanted to do a little bit now with Wagner College. So and then that one assistant principal decided she's not going to tell anybody what she's doing, including me, and she started building partnerships with Wagner College professors on her own. As crazy as that sounds, that model became the model for all the assistant principals, and they all started reaching out. The science assistant principal started working with the physician's assistant program at Wagner. The business person started working with the business side. So it came from there out. And in terms of the competencies, there really weren't any specific trainings I did other than I kept saying yes. So when they wanted a bus to go to Wagner College, when they wanted to try a partnership, the culinary kids with the nurses built a farm on our roof together to grow herbs and vegetables because they were healthy, and then the kids would know how to cook it. The history kids did something with the history department at Wagner about the Holocaust because Wagner had connections into interviewing people who had lived through the Holocaust. So it came about from that. To be honest, my parents are not tremendously involved in the school. The parents who are on the leadership team of the school, and at monthly meetings, they were kept abreast of the latest Wagner College doings because that was something we could celebrate. And the community school piece of our school, which is a national model that we were involved in, that also allowed us to bring in community partners into the work to support it and also spread it. So I can't say that it was specific training other than if people had an idea, I wanted them to run with it because it seemed like every time there was an idea, there came about positive energy.
Yeah, I think the overview at the macro level was strong leadership, strategic vision for the community, but essentially, as Tim was saying, unleashing the creativity at all levels for good ideas and good practices. So amongst the students in the middle school and the high school and the college, there was a tremendous amount of synergy around good ideas that they would come up with from the bottom, so to speak, if we're looking at it hierarchically. And on the faculties of both the college and the staff and the high school, again, as Tim was alluding to, there was a lot of energy and creativity that goes on, and we learn from each other in that sense, in that regard. So great stuff.
Our next question: how long did it take to really start seeing a shift at Port Richmond in the areas mentioned, such as student self-esteem and confidence? Also, what kind of impacts did you see in areas such as literacy rates and other academic areas at the high school?
And I'll let you do that, and maybe Pedro can jump in as well.
Yeah, I would say once we established PERPLA, I think there was a major shift where we had a leadership academy where the kids were living on campus, where there was a permanent Wagner college office. We have our own college office, but then there was the Wagner college office with different activities. I think that's what the mayor came, the chancellor came. Suddenly I was smart. Suddenly this was like good stuff. So I think then people started to recognize, well, look at this little school over here that everybody said was in the tough neighborhood and, be careful of. Suddenly, if you walk in, as Richard said, it's the world's cleanest school because my kids deserve a clean school and the kids are nice. And suddenly, I think there was, we're important enough for the mayor to come here. We're important enough that a Wagner College president comes here all the time and talks to us. Those little things matter to kids. And if you don't have those, you're sending a message. But when you do, I think that was when there's a shift. And that shift carries on today. I'm out of there, but my successor has done a phenomenal job. And, they were the chancellor was there on Monday celebrating another college program. So it has carried on, but it does take time and patience and small steps.
Before we should tell quickly the story of Mindy, because this is a kind of a illustrative story. So Mindy was one of our students we wanted when we just started the Leadership Academy, essentially the college prep program at Port Richmond and Wagner. She was very resistant. She didn't want to be part of it. She didn't think she was college material in any way, shape, or form. Pedro had some of those conversations as well. Tim was insistent. She applied, she got in. It was a struggle all the way between, social forces in the community pulling her one way and this partnership pulling her another way, and her parents hoping that she would choose the right direction. Long story short, I won't go through the whole thing. It's in the book. Mindy graduated with a degree in nursing from Wagner College. She's a nurse now on Staten Island. She likely would have not, her life would have been completely different if she hadn't hit this program. And that's one great example, I think, to kind of give a human touch to literacy levels and graduation rates and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I would say definitely with the integration of college students within the Port Richmond landscape, that in itself started to just create a sense of self-esteem within students. I felt as a student that by having college students there to talk to engage with, just to like validate my experiences and our voices and our concerns, was just kind of like, you could see ultimately and like almost instantaneously the effects that this had on the student body within Port Richmond. Seeing, like we said, seeing college students walking through the hall, seeing college students engaging with our culinary arts programs, with different components of Port Richmond life. You've seen it automatically. People saw that they could do more than what we were told we could do. And the fact that college students were taking time out of their days to engage with us, I think that made all the difference.
Tim quickly, I know we have another question, so Tim quickly identified that what Wagner students were doing at Port Richmond High School, he wanted his high school students to do at the middle school. And the work began to travel down, where high school students became mentors to middle school students, and then to some degree into the elementary school. So that it really became a very vibrant texture.
Okay, we have one more question. If anyone else has any other questions, please let me know before we finish up this one. There are so many local and national organizations and institutions involved in this work, but yet it doesn't always feel like we're moving in the same direction or making the case as clear as we need to. How do we build a stronger and more cohesive movement?
I'll take on that one. And this has been a song I've been singing when I chaired all these different boards of the national organizations that we mentioned. These there's a litany of organizations at the national level: higher education associations, the Anchor Institutions Task Force, the Association of American College Universities and its Civic programs, the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. These are thousands of institutions when you put them all together. A Campus Compact, which had 1,000 institutional members of college presidents, which is dedicated to public service. Small one, Project Pericles, which is about 30 institutions, which does lots of work around the curriculum and civic engagement. These are, and there are others. There are others. There's Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU, which has had a significant footprint in this world of partnerships. There's so many others, but they all, like every organization, they tend to have their own boards, their own constituencies, and it's as well-meaning as it is to sort of work together across those differences, it has become complicated. There was a wonderful organization put together by AACNU under Carol Schneider's leadership and Karen Musel, who was really the guidepost for all of this work, that led to an attempt to integrate these institutions together in terms of common work as a collaboration meeting a couple of times a year. We need to do much more of that. And I think here's where I think the pressure points could be. The pressure points could be from the philanthropies, because they have a tremendous impact on universities and colleges, the ones that are interested in this kind of work. And there are many, both established philanthropies and also family philanthropies that can have a big role in terms of saying, we'd like to see more of these K through 16 pipelines, for instance, more of these neighborhood partnerships develop, because the other anchors in the neighborhoods are not just the university. We were a lead anchor, but as I said, in healthcare, in the hospitals, the libraries, the public school system, the nonprofits, the churches, these are all anchored in those communities. So the anchors can be multiple in the community, and they need to have some power put in front of them, but also some metrics for performance and for working together collaboratively. Some of that happens. There's a group called Strive, which has tried to do, citywide and regionally wide impact of this work. It gets complicated, but I do think that one of the ways we can do this is greater emphasis from the philanthropies on these kinds of efforts to work together cross sector. That might be it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Patty. Thank you, stylists. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you,
audience, for doing it. It was a joy to write the book. It's a celebration in many ways of many good things that are going on, and it faces up to some of the challenges for going forward. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you to all of our authors for sharing their time and presenting with us today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in with us live this afternoon on Zoom. If you are interested in pre-ordering Neighborhood Democracy, use code NDEM25, that's NDEM25, to get 25% off the book and free shipping from Stylus Publishing. The discount expires November 30th, 2021, and the book is due out in early December. I've shared a link to the book page in the chat as well. The webinar video replay will be available this Friday and shared on all of our Stylus social media feeds. Everyone who has registered for this event will also receive a direct link to the replay, as well as all of our book links and discount links by Friday. If you have any feedback on this webinar or any requests for future webinars, please feel free to email us directly at stylusinfo@styluspub.com.